Welcome, everyone, to the Canvas live streams. Once again, we are here for another digital learning showcase. The California MTSS Digital Learning Showcase is really designed to amplify the stories of educators leveraging Canvas LMS to support high-quality MTSS. Our hope is that you'll leave here inspired to connect and continue building towards a more equitable future for all students. And I am very excited this morning because we are joined by Pam Tuppy, who is the coordinator of inclusive practices there at Orange County's Department of Education, to talk universally on designing asynchronous learning. We're going to talk about the MTSS conference. We're going to talk about some of the things that she's doing there at Orange County. I cannot be happier to welcome her to the live stream. Pam, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks so much, Eddie. It's my pleasure to be here. As Eddie mentioned, I am a coordinator of inclusive practices at Orange County Department of Education. And what that means is that my work has a range of areas of focus, including California MTSS, Universal Design for Learning, inclusive practices, struggling readers. I basically try to just really meet the needs of our stakeholders wherever I can. My background is in special education. I co-taught for many years in a general education classroom, and I've been working at the county office for about 17 years now, really looking at how to support students that are struggling and how to create access for all students. So I love talking about California MTSS, and I'm really excited to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Eddie, did you want to say something?
No, sorry. I was just going to talk a little bit about the conference that's coming up. This is the 4th annual California MTSS Professional Learning Institute, the PLI, and that is happening on July 20th and 22nd virtually. We're going to throw the link for all our California folks down below that will be able to register from that link. We talk a little bit about this year's theme, Know Me, Include Me, which is kind of hosted by Orange County, as well as some other partners, if you want to talk about them as well.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. This is going to be a great conference, and it is virtual, so it really is open to anybody that wants to attend. But the focus is looking at how the California MTSS frameworks that our schools and districts have been building over the last few years are really trying to increase equity for all. When we say all means all, we really mean it, and we want to make sure that we are providing a lot of resources for schools, districts, and teachers to be able to help meet their needs of their students. So we're going to have lots of different areas of focus, whether it's restorative practices, positive behavior interventions and supports. There'll be a lot on universal design for learning. We have a few big name speakers, including Dr. Katie Novak and Mirko Chardin, who are going to be coming and talking, as well as Jennifer Levine, who is the head of the the Center for Applied Special Technologies, or CAST. So we've got a lot of topics that we can cover and a lot of areas of support that will help really look at how we can improve systems for all students, some students, and few students.
Super exciting. So Pam, I'll let you share your screen. I can't wait. Big UDL fan here. I did some research on UDL a few years ago and have always been a big proponent of that. So I can't wait to see what you have in store for us.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and let's see. Let me just get that going here. Perfect. Eddie, can you see that?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, perfect. So I am going to be talking about universally designing asynchronous learning. So Eddie's going to pop in the chat a link to a Google resource document that has access to these slides that I'm sharing, as well as resources for additional learning. So I'm just going to click quickly on the resource document that you're going to have access to. It looks like this. Here you'll see a link to our presentation for the day. And if you scroll down, you're going to see different images in the left-hand column. And those are visual cues for you that there's additional content and resources back in this resource document if you want to refer to it. A little bit later, we're going to have an opportunity to do some choice activities, and you'll have links to those here in this document, as well as in the slide deck that you have access to. So let's go ahead and get started and talk a little bit about what I mean by universally designing asynchronous learning. And before we do that, I'd like you to take a moment to think about yourself as a learner. We only have a few minutes together today in this short online live course, but even if you're listening to this after the fact, think about, for this particular session, what is a goal that you have for today's experience? And what is something that's going to help you remain engaged? Obviously, if you are participating live, you have a lot of opportunity to chat and ask questions. But if you are listening to this asynchronously, what is something that you are going to do to help remain engaged over this time? So you have 4 different response options. You can either type in the chat, or you can write notes on a Post-it. You can text a friend or a colleague that might be doing this with you remotely. You can record a voice memo to yourself, or you can even create a doodle. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to kind of think about what's a goal that you have for today's experience and how will you stay engaged, and then we'll come back together.
These are always the moments that I need music, right? That you don't have music that you need music for. We do encourage you in the comment section. Please type out, as a learner, what is a goal that you have for today's experience? What will help you remain engaged? And as those comments come in, we can throw them up there. But love that. And the resource doc is available on the chat, as well as that MTSS registration.
Perfect. So just be thinking about this goal as we go through the next few minutes and as we dive a little bit deeper. So our outcomes today are twofold. We want to explore the principles and framework of Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, in a really short time. But we also want to think about how can those principles of Universal Design for Learning be used within Canvas to build learner expertise and content knowledge. So I want to just clarify something. This session is not about accessible digital design or focusing on how to use the accessibility features of Canvas. Canvas has a lot of amazing resources and tools to make sure that as you are creating content in their learning environments, that you can make sure that it is accessible to all sorts of the needs of the students, the people that are going to be taking your courses. So there are tips and help guides for, suggestions on font size, contrast between dark and light. So there's all sorts of things that are designed within Canvas to be accessibility features. But we are going a little bit deeper. We are going to assume that you're utilizing some of those features. And now we're thinking about how can we remove barriers to student learning with the content that you're going to be presenting within your Canvas environment. I have an icon here, a little graphic of the UDL and Blended Learning book that just came out from Katie Novak and Caitlin Tucker. If you want more information on sort of what UDL looks like in blended learning environments and how you can use learning management systems like Canvas or other things that your school or district might be utilizing, this is a really great resource for looking at how to have students, whether they're adults or kids, really thrive in flexible learning environments. So I want to make sure that I mention that because I can't really get to everything in just a few minutes. So I want to briefly just start with this idea of an ice cream truck. Katie Novak is an amazing consultant and works with CAST, the Center for Applied Special Technologies, really closely. And she has a lot of resources that she has shared with the state of California. She has been at most of our California MTSS PLIs. She's done a lot of work locally in Orange County and across the state. And she has talked about this idea of, UDL as the ice cream truck. So if you are on a hot day at a beach or somewhere and the Sugar Shack rolls up and you're really excited to get something cool and refreshing and you go to the Sugar Shack, remember your goal is cool, refreshing treat. And you think, I'm going to get my favorite treat. You go there and the Sugar Shack only sells pralines and cream ice cream. Now you might be really excited because that might be what you were going for your cool and refreshing treat. Or you might be kind of disappointed because, gosh, that's not really your favorite, but it'll do because, it's still hot and you want something cool and refreshing. But you might have other barriers to this one choice of ice cream. You might be lactose intolerant. You might have a nut sensitivity. You might be on a sugar-free diet or a low-carb diet. So the ice cream truck that has just the one option is not going to meet your needs, and it's going to create a barrier. But we know that most ice cream trucks have a lot of different options because the ice cream truck owner knows that there is predictable variability in what his customers are going to want on a hot summer day. They might want ice cream, they might want sorbets, they might want a sugar-free icy or something. But the idea is that there's a predictable variability that ice cream truck driver knows about. Much like in education, there is a predictable variability in how our students learn that is directed by neuroscience and how we know the brain learns, and that we as teachers can think about that neuroscience and that predictable variability when we are designing our instruction, whether it's live, synchronous, or asynchronous. So I want to just talk about these 3 principles that Katie Novak talks a lot about in her work. And the idea is that, when we're starting to talk about UDL, it's really easy to say, oh, well, I kind of already do that. I know how to engage kids. I know how to give kids choice in what they learn, how they show me what they know. I know how to give them different ways of learning content. But if you are just doing those things without these foundational beliefs, you're still kind of missing the UDL framework. So the UDL framework itself is built on the idea that variability is the rule, it is not the exception, and that students don't have to do the same things at the same time. Also, all students can work towards the same firm goals, and we need to have high expectations and make sure that we are providing access to rigorous grade level content. And finally, all students can be expert learners if the barriers to learning are removed. One other little note about how this connects to differentiation, because if you are new to UDL, you might be thinking, how is this different from that? Really, there are a couple subtle differences. UDL is focusing on the questions of what is it that I want all my learners to know or do? What are the barriers that are going to get in the way? And how can I design flexible pathways to make sure that everyone's learning and sharing what they know? Differentiation comes alongside that to then add, well, how am I grouping my students within that flexibly? And how am I creating supports or experiences that are challenging my students in ways that meet their needs? So these are just kind of some subtle connections that I wanted to make. And if you have more questions about that, when we get to the choice activity in just a minute, you are going to be able to learn a little bit more. So I love this that comes from Katie's work. If you are looking at having high standards for your students and creating access to grade level content standards in a rigorous way, incorporating student voice and choice, making sure that you are flexibly designing pathways for learning, you're really getting at the heart of UDL. Just a word about barriers, because we're going to talk about that when I walk you through my Canvas course. Barriers come in all shapes and sizes, but mostly they are going to be related to what we're teaching or the goal, how we are teaching or our instructional design, the materials that we're using, or how we're measuring learning. So when we are looking at my Canvas course in just a minute, I'll show you a little bit more about that. The connection I want to make here to California MTSS is that if you look at the bottom of the screen, it shows that universal design for learning is implemented at all levels of support. And it is really the foundational framework of all instruction, whether it be academic, behavioral, or social emotional. These principles can guide all of learning. The goal, again, of learning, as we mentioned earlier, is creating expert learners. And we know if we remove barriers to learning, all students can become expert learners that are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-directed. You'll have access to the slide, and there are more resources in that resource doc if you want to learn a little bit more about expert learning. But I wanted to talk about that just as a way to introduce the guidelines, where really the goal of the guidelines are to create expert learners. And how do we do that? In 3 ways. We create options for engagement, which is a principle. So the other 2 principles are representation and action and expression. Those 3 areas make up the principles of universal design for learning. And then we achieve those, create access to those principles through the guidelines themselves, which are the bold phrases that you see up in the screen. And then the checkpoints are underneath each of those. So by looking at this as sort of a roadmap for creating flexible instructional design, we can increase access. So I talked for a little bit. I want to give you 5 minutes to explore any of these different resources. So if you want to go a little bit more in differentiation, you might look at the first 2 resources in that left column. If you want a little bit more of an understanding about the why behind universal design, and also why we talk about inclusive practices when we talk about California MTSS, you might want to watch this really great video here from Shelley Moore. If you are really now thinking, well, what does this look like in the classroom, or you want more of an overview, you might go to the resources in the 3rd column. And if you want to go deeper with the guidelines, because the 2 seconds I spent talking about them wasn't enough for you, go ahead and click on this link here that says UDL guidelines, or you can even go into looking at some of the lesson design content connections and click on that. So I am going to stop talking for a couple of minutes, and I'll check in with you in 3 or 4 minutes and see how we're doing. Eddie, we can kind of gauge based on how many people are in here, but we'll come back together at 9:20 so that we can wrap up and I can talk about what all of this now looked like in Canvas for me when I was designing a course.
Yeah, and because it's a live format and we're live, we did have William Carpenter on our YouTube channel came in clutch, because we'll give everybody kind of an opportunity to look through that stuff. But he has a question here that I thought maybe you could speak to, and asked, how does UDL take into consideration on access when designing and considering technical requirements? So curious your take on that question. We'll leave that question up. We'll talk about that. We'll let others kind of dive into that. And then I think once we're done discussing, we might be able to move forward.
Yeah, and if William can clarify a little bit more about technical requirements, does he mean technical requirements of various platforms? Does he mean online learning? I'd love to know a little bit more about that, and then I can better address that when we answer questions at the end.
Yeah, I wonder if a little bit of this might be the technical requirements of their specific institution. So William, if you don't mind clarifying a little bit, we'll take the questions at the end here to discuss more in depth. But yeah, I think if it was me asking the question, when we talk about access, I'm wondering if, a lot of their students may not have devices, or a lot of their students may have, inaccessible internet, and that gets into the whole piece on access. And in fact, if you're sticking around today and learning with us through this digital learning showcase with MTSS in California, there is a great session. I'm trying to pull it up quickly. Look, I'm trying to do things on the fly. It is coming up shortly at 1 o'clock Eastern time, 10 a.m. obviously there. Access and equity is the next session. So William did clarify here, access to technology and broadband specifically. So we might be able to speak to that a little bit and give people just a little bit more time to dig into some of those activities.
Absolutely. Couple of the resources, but I also want to bring you back so that we can look at the Canvas course and kind of how I thought about some of these principles and how I designed it. And then we have some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and log into, this is the student view of one of my courses. So as I mentioned earlier, I focus on universal design for learning as one of the areas of professional learning that I offer to schools and districts within Orange County. And I developed 3 UDL courses, a UDL 101 that looks at the basics of universal design, a UDL 201 that gets really into content-specific lesson design, and then a UDL 301 that is really focused on coaching and supporting sustainability of universal design within a school site. So I want to just show you a couple of ways that I looked at how can I think about making sure that I am talking about universal design in the development of my Canvas course. So I'm just going to take you to the navigation page here. All of my courses start out with a little bit of a welcome. And in this one here, it's called Welcome to the Party. And basically it kicks off with introducing the idea that you have 2 pathways for learning. You can either read a narrative or you can watch a video at the end of the page. So a student would choose whether or not they want to read content or if they want to watch content that is guided asynchronously by one of our course instructors. And once they have done that, once they have chosen a pathway, Then I ask them to set a goal to connect to the principle of engagement for universal design for learning, similar to how you did. No matter how short or long a course is, or how live or asynchronous it is, it's really important to establish goals and identify what will help you stay engaged in that learning context. So we have them in this particular one, it's completely asynchronous. So there are opportunities to incorporate content into Padlets and things like that, or Jamboards, but it's all asynchronous. So that's for this particular one that I'm showing you. Once they do that, we have them make a plan. How are they going to work through the content and pace themselves? And when are they going to do it? What's their best time of day? It's having them think about making a plan. So we right off the bat start to think about how are we engaging students and thinking about the principles of universal design and how they're going to be accessing this content. The next thing I want to show you is down here in a section when we're going deeper in the universal designs. Here they have 3 pathways. It's the read pathway. Well, first of all, we are introducing a little bit of content. And the way, sometimes there are times where you have to learn the same content or read the same article, but we try to do different ways of doing that. So in this particular section of the module, we're having you look at a graphic organizer. And then you're deciding, do I want to go deeper into the course text and read some content? Or do I want to watch another overview? What is going to be the way that I want to best learn that content? Or do I want to do something, which is, in this particular case, it's going to CAS website, viewing their interactive guidelines, and having some prompts and a purpose for reading in doing that. I just want to show you a couple of other things. It's really important to give students choice. So for this particular, when they get to module 2, they're going deeper in the principles themselves. So once they've learned about engagement and chosen a pathway for learning, now they have choices in how they're going to design their next steps. So they might do further reading. They might start looking at some resources to really develop more of the rationale behind this, or they might look at other strategies or activities or resources to go a little bit deeper. So there's always this idea of choice built into how are you designing their next steps? How are you as a learner becoming an expert learner, and how are you doing something that is meaningful to you and driving your own content knowledge further? The lesson design resource I want to show you is, again, we are going to be reading a blog from Katie Novak. We're going to be looking at her flowchart all together, but then your pathways are very different. You can either now design a lesson and do something with that information, or you can decide, I still need to see more of this in action, and you can look at different videos that are aligned to your grade level or your content area. The last thing I wanted to show you, and how one of the ways I design all of my Canvas courses, is I really try to have robust resource sections. So after doing the 101 course, where you've gotten a little bit of an introduction to the 3 principles of engagement, representation, and action and expression, now you have more resources that are intentionally curated for this particular level. So even though there's a lot of choice, it's still based on the idea of we want to go deeper in the principles. So you might decide you want to focus on engagement, or you might decide you want to focus on representation or action and expression. You have a choice. And then within that, you can decide on, do I want more resources on why this is important? Do I want more examples of what this particular principle looks like in action? Or do I want to start thinking about MTSS, California MTSS, and do I want to connect now to inclusive behavior and inclusive social emotional learning? So there are lots of different ways that we can design our course so that we are thinking about how are we using the principles to go beyond just accessibility and removing barriers in form and function, but how am I actually teaching UDL using these principles within the course? So a lot of my courses kind of end with a culminating activity where there are ways for you to either refine a lesson, as could be a choice, or you're designing your own lesson template, or you're looking at content connections. But the idea is that no matter what, whether it's a completely asynchronous course, or it's a district course that is having some live components in it, I'm offering choice and flexibility along the way. And hopefully that they can have choice and flexibility, not only how they are digesting and learning content, but in how they are showing what they know as well. The other 2 resources I want to just show you have to do with distance learning, and then we'll have some time for a couple questions. But we put together this resource, we meaning the Orange County Department of Education, we put together this resource of tips and tools for how to be thinking about universally designing distance learning and it's aligned to the California Department of Education's distance learning best practices. We don't have time to go in it, but I do want to make sure that you know that you have all of these resources and more within that resource document that you can refer back to. So I want to close by just thinking about having you reflect on, how did you meet your goal today? What kept you engaged during this session? And then we have time for a few questions. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen too, Eddie.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear from you in the comment section below on how this session was impactful and what you took away from Pam Tuppy's presentation today. And I think, again, I'm a big UDL fan, right? And Ray here asked a question. I can actually answer this. Are those mastery paths in Canvas, or are there mastery paths in Canvas specific to UDL? We always kind of imported those on our side. We didn't have UDL specific mastery paths, but we did have a number of rubrics and objectives and those types of things that we put in. Might be a question for Carissa here that's joining us, our learning consultant there in California, on mastery paths in Canvas for specific UDL modalities. So I'm excited to kind of dive into this question as well. It's a fantastic segue from our boy Will earlier, Carpenter, on the YouTube page, which was access to technology and broadband and how UDL takes that into consideration on access. So I'll let you dive into that while we kind of get more comments coming in, or we get some answers to some of those questions. And then we'll segue right into the access and equity into Canvas session here in a little bit.
That's perfect segue. William knew this is something that all of our districts and school sites have really been dealing with over the past year. And technology is a resource, but it also creates barriers in limited internet access, technology. All of those things are really challenging. My connection to UDL with that would be that really, we want to make sure that the technology is continuing to engage kids and be a tool for learning. So the fundamental, just getting Chromebooks or whatever into the hands of kids and getting them onto Zoom and using Canvas as a course, that's like level one of creating access. Like, we want to just make sure we are getting our kids online and being able to interact with one another. And that, to me, has been the most important focus of this past year, especially with distance learning. But now one of the things that we're looking at is, a lot of schools and districts are thinking, well, how can we continue this going? Canvas was such a great tool during the pandemic. How can we keep utilizing this? Myself, as a county office person, I want to continue it going because I'm looking at access issues just in terms of, I don't know what teachers are going to be able to do this year. So everything that I offer, I'm going to be offering live, either in person if it's ever comes to that, or online live, and Canvas. Like, I'm keeping Canvas going as a part of that conversation because it's such a valuable tool. So hopefully that kind of addressed your question, but if not, you can always message me later as well.
We're getting tons of love on some of the things that you provided today, which was really like the analogy between buffet dinner for UDL versus preparing each meal individually for each person on differentiated learning. Emily here from LinkedIn, thank you for the presentation. And our friend Carissa, she's always reminded that asynchronous learning does not mean online or at home, but has more to do with differentiation and student agency.
Absolutely.
It's a really powerful tool for that, which we typically believe here as a company. We are super excited to be partnering today with California and their MTSS Professional Learning Institute. I will repost the link in the conversation below so you can register for this year. And this year's theme is Know Me, Include Me. And that is happening on July 20th through the 22nd, virtually, their 4th annual California MTSS Professional Learning Conference. Our showcase today is all about amplifying stories all across California. We're excited to be joined by Pam. Thank you so much for being part of the live stream. More comments coming in. People love Canvas, right? Canvas is a great tool for face-to-face learning. We don't want people to forget that as they go back into the classroom. Again, guys, thank you so much for joining us. As always, join us today. We are 6 live streams today, and the next one, Access and Equity in Canvas. Really excited to be joined by Ricardo and Teresa again. They did a fantastic studio session the last time we did a digital learning showcase in California. They are back to talk about immersive reader and the accessibility checker, all things that you need to learn about when talking about MTSS, right? So super excited to learn from them once again. That is coming up at the top of the hour. So we have about 30 minutes. You can join us again. Everybody, thank you so much. Like, share, get all of this content out to all of those folks that you believe it will be impactful for. We will see you again in about 30 minutes. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.